Hello everyone and welcome to another video. My name is Wisdom and this is DevOps with Wisdom, where we talk about all things DevOps. And in today's video, we're going to talk about AWS CLI. We'll see what AWS CLI is. We'll install AWS CLI, configure AWS CLI with IAM credentials, and run some basic commands. Now, what is AWS CLI? It is a free tool that lets you control AWS services directly from your command line. You can perform the same tasks you would normally perform on the AWS Management Console, but faster and more efficiently. AWS CLI is available on various operating systems such as Linux, macOS, Windows, and so on and so forth. One of the advantages of AWS CLI is that it helps you to perform repetitive tasks in an automated fashion, thereby saving you loads of time. So we're going to look at how AWS CLI can be installed and how we can run some commands. So let's dive straight in. All right, so in order to install AWS CLI, I would advise you follow the latest AWS CLI user guide. As you can see on my screen, I'll put the link in the description. And it will go to the install/updates section. Now here you would look for the instructions that match the operating system that you are running. So I am running the Mac OS, so I would drop this down and look for the commands that can enable me install this on Mac OS. So I'm going to use the command line installer for all users, and I will copy the commands here to perform the installation. So let's go. Okay, that runs successfully. I was able to download the package, and I'll run the installer command here and put in my password. All right, so the installation was successful here. And if I run AWS --version, I would see my AWS CLI version here, 2.22.26. You can also run which AWS, and this will show you the path to the AWS CLI binary. All right, great. So the next thing I'll need to do is to configure AWS CLI with the appropriate credentials it needs to access the AWS services. In order to do that, I'll go to the AWS console and search for IAM. I'll select IAM. And in the IAM console, I would go to my users. I have one user here, Wisdom. I would go to security credentials, scroll down and create an access key for this user. Now, access keys are used to send programmatic calls to AWS from AWS CLI and other AWS tools. So we need this to be able to grant AWS CLI permissions to call services on AWS. So I'll click Create Access Key and select Command Line Interface. Select I understand and click Next. And leave this empty. I'll click Create Access Key. Great. So this gives me my access key, and I would copy this and would use it in the next step. You can also click the download CSV button so that you can have this saved for next time. Great. So we will go to our terminal now, and on the terminal, I'll type AWS configure. This will begin the process of configuring AWS CLI with the correct credentials, and I'll press enter. This will ask for an access key ID, which I would copy from here and paste. Then this will ask for a secret access key also, which I will copy from here and paste. It asks for a default region name. US is 1 is fine by me, but you can change this to whatever default region you want to use. It also asks for a default output format. I will leave this to none, but you can set it to JSON, text, or table. So I'll press enter to continue. Great. So it looks like that's all set up. Okay, so in order to test that we can use AWS CLI to access the services on AWS, I'm going to run a few AWS commands to create an S3 bucket, upload a file, list the bucket, and delete the bucket. So when working with AWS CLI, you would usually use the command AWS followed by the name of the service you want to work with, in this case S3, and the command you want to run on that service. So in my case, make buckets, which is MB. So I'll type this and I'll put the S3 URI and the name of the bucket I want to create. Wisdom's first bucket. So I'll run this command now to create an S3 bucket from the AWS CLI. Awesome, that created successfully. And in order to confirm, we'll go back to the console and go to S3. I'll search for S3 here. And we can see that the bucket was successfully created. Nice. Next, we would upload a file to the bucket. So I'll create a file called testfile.txt and I'll say this is my test file for my first S3 bucket. So I'll save this file. Then I'll run a command to copy this file to the S3 bucket, which is AWS S3 cp is copy testfile.txt to the bucket I have on here. I'll just copy this and paste with a / here, and that should copy the file successfully. Awesome. So we'll go back to the bucket here and confirm that this was copied successfully. So indeed, we can see the test file here. And I can also do the same thing to check for the test file by doing AWS S3 ls, then the bucket path, and I can see the test file exists as we confirmed on the console. So in order to delete the contents of this bucket and the bucket itself, I'll run AWS S3 rm and I will delete the file testfile.txt and finally delete the bucket itself with the command rb, which is for remove buckets. There's so much more you can do with AWS CLI. I will encourage you to look at the AWS CLI command reference. You can just type AWS CLI reference and you would see all the commands that you can run with AWS CLI just at the bottom here. So these are all the available services for AWS CLI. And if you select one, say S3, you would see all the commands that I ran here. Great. I hope this video was useful to you. If you followed along, great job. In today's video, we've talked about what AWS CLI is, how to install AWS CLI, setting it up and configuring it with your credentials, and running some common AWS commands like creating and managing S3 buckets. By now, you should feel confident using AWS CLI to manage your AWS resources. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to DevOps with Wisdom for more tutorials like this. Please also leave a comment telling me what topics you would like me to talk about. And I'll see you in the next video.